Welcome back, everybody. And today's guest is a return guest, Thomas Umstattd Jr. Welcome, Thomas.
Thanks, Brian. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. And I know you're a friend of Fiction Marketing Academy. But for those of you who don't know Thomas, he is the founder of Author Media and the host of the Novel Marketing Podcast, which, if you listen to it, you know is the longest running book marketing podcast in the world. And I very much recommend it. Now, Thomas helps authors build their platforms, sell more books, and change the world with writing worth talking about. And today, we are going to explore a topic that is very, very interesting, in my opinion, which some authors do completely wrong. Some authors, I never seen a way in between. It's very black or white, and so I'm eager to explore the topic, and that's obviously, as you can see, author platforms. So whenever you are ready, Thomas, I'm going to hand the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you, Brian. I'd like, if it's okay, to open with a story. Once upon a time, there were three little pigs who went off to go and find their fortune. The first little pig found a man selling straw, and he said, "If you buy my straw, you can have a house today." Well, it sounded pretty good to the first little pig. And sure enough, that same day, he had a house. The next little pig found a man selling sticks. He said, "Sticks are more work, but a house with sticks is more better." And so after a couple days of work, the second little pig had a house built with sticks. And the first little pigs were laughing and playing in the sun because their houses did not take long to build. Well, meanwhile, of course, the third little pig is hard at work building his house with bricks because and even though they invite him to come and play with him, he tells them that he has to work because he knows that out in the woods is the big bad wolf. You know the story. The big bad wolf comes upon the house of the first little pig, and he says, little pig, let me in, let me in." And the little pig says, "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin." So the big bad wolf huffs and he puffs and he blows the house down and he eats the first little pig. Now, I don't know how it is in Italy, Brian. I'm sure you have this story, but in America, we have a lot of watered down versions of this story. But in the old versions, the little pigs always get eaten.
Yeah.
Well, the big bad wolf comes upon the house, the second little pig, and he huffs and he puffs and he blows, but the house would not blow down. And so he sets the house on fire and has a meal of roast little pig. And then, of course, he comes to the house of the third little pig. He blows and it won't blow down. He burns and it won't burn down. And the third little pig lived happily ever after. So what does this have to do with authors? And more specifically, what does it have to do with platform building? Well, most authors build their platforms poorly, and we're going to talk about the different ways they do that today. So let's talk about straw. And to talk about straw, we need to ask the question, why do you write? Are you writing because you want to be somebody? Because writing is your path to a better life, to acclaim or admiration? Which I will tell you, if that's why you're writing, you need to get into a different line of work, because this is the path of hard work and rejection. It's not the path to admiration like it may look in the marketing. So if you're not writing to be somebody, or maybe you are, but the other option is you're writing because you want to do something, because you want to provide for your family, because you want to make a difference in the world, because you want to serve your readers. You know, authors looking for validation in publishing end in sadness and despair. It's not, like I said, it's not a good place for affirmation. It's a place of rejection, and you really do need a higher purpose if you want to succeed. Authors with that higher purpose have a huge advantage. Even if that purpose is just to provide for your family, it gives you a big advantage to know your why. Or put it another way, it can't be all about you. Love your readers more than you love your book. So when is it okay to sell yourself? This is a question a lot of authors ask. And a lot of authors feel weird promoting their book or promoting themselves, building up their platform, becoming famous, which is often either a requirement for being a successful author or a outcome of being a successful author is that you get famous. And if that makes you feel weird inside, If your conscience is sabotaging your promotion, you'll never be successful. You need to be in agreement with what you're doing. So let's answer this question. When is it okay to sell yourself? And I'd like to answer this question with a story. It's about a physician named Dr. Barry Marshall. And for decades, medical students were taught that chronic stomach ailments, including peptic ulcers and gastritis, were caused by stress, greasy food, or too much alcohol. Barry Marshall's research, though, showed that this was completely wrong. His research showed that stomach acid was causing the pain, but that the ulcers were actually caused by bacteria. And the acid was the body trying to fight the bacteria. So taking an acid was actually the worst thing a stomach ulcer patient could do to actually cure the disease. Now, Dr. Barry Marshall is just a physician down in Australia. And when he went to the medical community telling them that they were wrong, they weren't too impressed. And he said, let me prove my findings. Give me research for some animal trials. So they gave him permission to do some trials on some wee little pigs. And he learned what any farmer could have told him, and that is pigs can eat just about anything, and ulcers aren't really a problem for them. So he was unable to validate his theory on the little pigs. Pigs have a very robust digestive system. That's why we like them, because they can eat the foods that we cannot. So he goes back to the medical community and he says, I know I wasn't able to prove my results with the animal trials, but I know that I'm right. I know that you're wrong. Please give me permission to do human trials. And they say, no way, Jose, that's not how this works. We don't do human trials when the animal trials fail. So Dr. Barry Marshall's in a quandary. He knows that he's right. He knows that the medical community is wrong. And he doesn't have permission to do the trials that he needs to do to demonstrate his findings. And so Dr. Barry Marshall does a very courageous thing. He takes a broth of H. pylori bacteria, which is the specific bacteria that he suspected was the cause of most stomach ulcers, and he drinks it. Now, he had never gotten an ulcer before, right? He's a physician. He's not a patient. And he's thinking that maybe in a year or two, he'll get an ulcer and he can demonstrate his results. He gets an ulcer in 2 weeks. So then he's got an ulcer. He's doing all these tests on himself. And then he gives himself a very specific regimen of a very extreme antibiotic, and he cures himself of his ulcer. So now Dr. Barry Marshall has just discovered both the cause and the cure for an ailment that affects as much as 5% of people at one time of their lives. So when is it okay for Dr. Barry Marshall to sell himself? I would say that if he kept his discovery to himself, that would have been an unethical act. He has an obligation to the truth that he's discovered to establish his credibility so that people will believe him. He had an obligation to the truth that he discovered to interact with the media and get the word out and to promote his findings. In fact, Barry Marshall and some other physicians even created a comic book telling the story of him drinking the broth, and they would go to physicians' events and pass it out to the other doctors at the conference, which I thought was very clever. If I were in charge of reaching doctors, I would not think of a comic book, but that's what he did. It was very popular. And in 2005, Dr. Barry Marshall was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine. And if you go to your physician today with a stomach ulcer, you will get a breath test based off of Barry Marshall's research testing for H. pylori, the bacteria, the very bacteria that he infected himself with. Because it turned out he was right and the whole medical community was wrong. That's how science works. Truth is objective. It's not a matter of who has power. It's a matter of what we find using the scientific method. So why do you write? Is your fame a means or is it an end? Some authors cloak themselves in false humility, talking about how they're not writing because they want to be famous. They just have this story on their heart. They can't help but write. And I just want to get my story out there. And the whole time they're talking about this, they're talking about themselves. And if you're writing because you want to be validated, you're just not ready, because writing isn't about you and it's not for you. If you want readers to want to read your book, you have to write the book for them. This is a big shift, and something that I have talk a lot about on my podcast, Novel Marketing, is a lot of authors come to marketing, and probably you right, you signed up for this summit because you wrote a book and now you want to help getting the word out there. And once you shift from trying to find readers for your book to writing books for your readers, everything changes. And suddenly your sales go from a few hundred to thousands and thousands and thousands. And if you're wondering, why are my books not selling? This is likely the issue. Authorship is leadership. With nonfiction, you're leading readers into a new way of thinking. And with fiction, you're leading readers into a whole new world of your creation. And leadership is service. People are only going to follow you if you serve them. Right? You can't force somebody to buy your book unless you're writing a textbook. This is not compulsory. People have to want to read your book, and they have to want to read your book for their own reasons. And you can't both lead and hide. And this gets to the core of this first kind of mistake that authors make. And authors hide for different reasons. Sometimes they hide out of false humility. Sometimes they hide out of fear. Sometimes they hide because they're afraid of rejection. But if you want to lead, you have to be willing to be seen. You have to be willing to be heard. And this is really important, and I know it's not the focus of this conference, it's not the focus of my talk, but this is really important, and I know Brian will agree with me. You need to write a good book. You need to write the kind of book that you feel comfortable promoting, right? If deep down you think that selling somebody your book is them doing you a favor, then you're never going to be good at marketing, and you're going to always feel bad about doing it. And it's an indication that your book is not ready. Right, your book needs to be so good that you telling somebody about your book is you doing them a favor, because they're like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for telling me about this amazing book. This was such a good read. When does your next book come out? That's the quality of book you need to write. And until your book is that quality, you need to keep practicing. One of the best things that you can do for a career, if you're wanting to do this professionally, is to take the first book that you write and set it aside and write a new book with all of the experience and lessons learned that you gained from the first book. And that second book that you write, have that be the book that you take to market, that you sell to the world. Because as Larry Correia points out, this is the one industry where your whole career is judged by your rookie year, which is really rough, right? It's like most athletes, their rookie year is not very good, right? Because it takes them a while to get used to professional level play, right? It's one thing to be good in college or in high school. It's another to play against the pros. And yet, especially if you're writing a series, that book one of your series is how the whole rest of your series is judged. And if it's not very good, people may never get to book 5 or 6 that's really quite well written. So writing a good book is important, and I'm not going to teach you how to do that. There are a lot of great books on writing books, and I'll give you a couple quick tips. First is set your first book aside. The second is to read books on craft and to write short stories after you read a book on craft. So let's say you read a book on good dialogue. Write a short story, practicing what you just learned in that book on dialogue, really focusing on dialogue. And after you finish that book on dialogue, then go on and read a book on tension. And then write a short story where you're really trying to manage tension, or you're really trying to manage scenes or whatever. If you do this, it may seem like the long path, but it is actually the fastest way to get good. Don't make the same mistake for 100,000 words and make your editor fix it 30,000 times. Make the mistake in a short story, get the feedback, do the learning, and then make different, more advanced mistakes until finally you write a good book. So the second step to building your platform is finding your courage, right? Because you do need to be seen. And so let's assume that your book is good, right? And you're like, yes, this book, letting people know about this book is doing them a favor. Now it's a time to find your courage. So this is where we go back to that higher purpose, right? The greater your higher purpose, the bolder you will become, right? If you're writing to provide for your family, the hungrier your family is, the more willing you are to put yourself out there, right? If this is just hobby money, that may not be quite as motivating. Or maybe it's, I would say the best motivation is actually love. The more you love your reader, the less afraid you will be. And it's said that perfect love casts out all fear. I don't think we can love perfectly, but the more you love your reader, the more successful of an author you will be. So that's straw. Now let's talk about sticks and debunk the most common myth in platform building. So I think straw is the kind of deepest myth, right? Because it's unspoken. But now we're going to talk about the spoken myth, and that is that platform is your following on social media. You've probably heard this, that, if you could just get more social media followers, if more people will follow you on TikTok, if more people will follow you on Instagram, you'll sell more copies of your book. And that is not true. It's not true for a couple of reasons. One, many social accounts are fake. I used to have to really make a big argument about this, but now that people have seen how effective ChatGPT is, because those kinds of tools have existed for years. The only thing special about ChatGPT is that you're able to use it for free, and it's pretty easy to use. But spammers have been using tools like GPT for decades to create fake accounts. That person you're interacting with on Twitter may not be a person at all. Social media is a lot like the Matrix, where there's a lot of people who look human but are not. They're robots pretending to be human. So Brian, I'm going to play a game with you. I have here 2 photos, and we're going to play this game called Spot the Bot. Which of these photos is generated by a artificial intelligence program?
I would say A.
They are both generated by an artificial intelligence program.
Oh no.
It was a trick question. This person also does not exist. There used to be a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com, and every time you visited it, it would generate a new person who did not exist. Right? If you want 100,000 people to follow you on Twitter to impress some literary agent, you just need to make the right phone call. And you can have 100,000 people, and they're liking, sharing, and retweeting your content, and none of them are real, and none of them will buy your books because they're not people, they're bots. And this is a real problem on social media, and it's one that the publicly traded social networks have no incentive to do anything about, because one of the key metrics that affects their stock valuation is what's called monthly active users and daily active users. And because the bots are active users for that metric, because they're creating content and they're liking and they're sharing and they're clicking on ads, it inflates the stock values of the social networks. And so we're starting to see some crackdown, actually quite a bit of crackdown on bots on Twitter. And part of the reason Twitter is able to do that is because it's now privately held, and it's not trying to impress Wall Street saying, hey, look how many active users we have. But even Twitter still has a problem with bots. And it's why one of the things Elon Musk has rolled out is the verified tag, because the one thing that bots cannot do is pay money. So the best way to screen out bots is to put up a paywall, because even a $1 paywall will keep all the bots out. And you'll find that if you do anything with even the tiniest of paywalls, suddenly far fewer people sign up. And you're like, gosh, I thought I had this big following. Why didn't people sign up? It's like, well, because a lot of that following was inorganic. And you're like, but I didn't hire any bots. I didn't pay for fake accounts to follow me. It's like, you don't have to. If you're running a bot farm, you can't just follow Italian politicians, let's say, right? So one of the, I don't know the political parties there, but let's say one of the political parties comes to me and they're like, we want to fluff up our politicians and make them look really famous. So we want you to create some accounts to follow them. Well, I would, if I did that, I would have the bots follow them, but I'd also have them follow a bunch of random authors and a bunch of random athletes and musicians. And I'd have them click links and talk about all kinds of stuff, not just Italian politics, but they'll be talking about sports and the latest football match and all the rest of it. So they really do look human. And so your account is being used to validate fake accounts that you have nothing to do with, that have purposes that you don't know anything about, that could be run by big corporations or governments or hackers. And this is kind of the fundamental This is one of the fundamental problems of social media, but it's not the only one. The other one is that many social media accounts are inactive, right? So this is the Facebook stock for the last year, or I think it's about 18 months ago to 6 months ago. I need to update this slide. But the reason why Meta stock has been dropping is because people are spending less time on Facebook. And so it's not that they don't have an account there, but and it's not that they're not using it, it's that they're spending less time there, right? So somebody may have been spending 2 hours a day on Meta platforms like Instagram and Facebook, and now they're spending 30 minutes a day, and that's a lot less ad inventory that Facebook can sell, and that hurts their stock significantly. The other problem, though, is that social media sites filter. They use AI to determine what users see and what they don't see, which means just because you have 10,000 followers doesn't mean that all 10,000 followers will even see what you post. So let's do some numbers. Let's say your Facebook page has 10,000 likes, and let's say that 5,000 of them are active humans, which I feel like is a pretty good estimate for Facebook. I feel like about half of the total accounts are artificial. Now, Facebook recently would let up to 3% of your followers see what you post. It's lower now, but for the sake of generous numbers, let's say it's 3%. So of those 5,000 active humans, you're only going to get 150 views. And let's say your post is really good and you're getting 33% of the people who see it will click on your link. So that means you're getting 50 clicks. And let's say you have an incredible 20% conversion rate. So of the people who visit your website, 20% of them go on to buy. It means you would get 10 sales, which means with these numbers, which are very generous, right? Almost no one gets 20% conversion rate. Almost no one gets 33% click-through rate. But with these generous numbers, it's 1,000 likes to sell one copy organically on social media. You're not going to get there. Even if you have 100,000 followers, that's 100 sales. Social media is not going to move the number. And I've seen this as a marketing director. I've seen this as a marketing consultant. I've seen this as an author. I've looked at a lot of numbers and I get pushback on this. In fact, if you scroll down in the comments, if Brian turns them on, you'll probably see some really angry people saying, "Nuh-uh, social media does work." And my only rebuttal is show me the numbers. Show me on a graph, show me in your sales data where you're able to drive sales. I have never seen an author demonstrate that they were able to get good, consistent sales off of their personal profile. I've seen a few topical groups like a certain kind of fiction. If you run a group for a certain kind of fiction, occasionally that can drive traffic. And I've seen ads that can drive traffic. Which actually leads us to platform building and the difference between platform building and advertising. Trying to build a platform on social media is like trying to give a speech in a noisy stadium, right? Everyone is shouting and no one can hear you. And this is why a lot of the marketing gurus from the early 2000s and the 20 teens have quit, because their social media tactics just don't work. It's not 2008 anymore. If you're already rich and already famous, and you're on the field, you can get a lot of free attention. But if you're not on the field, being in the stands and shouting a little bit louder than everyone else around you doesn't get you any attention. So there's two methods that work. One is to be famous already and on the field where everyone is there to see you. And typically this means either an athlete or a musician or an actor or a politician, somebody with a C score. Or you advertise, right? Coca-Cola here is getting great prominence just as much as these soccer players or football players. And so that works, right? If you want to pay to put your book in front of people, that still works. But trying to shout from the stands doesn't work, not anymore. And the fall of social media is a good thing. Social media was expensive. It was toxic. And even in its best days, it was ineffective. So to build a lasting author platform, you must escape the social media trap. You need to start thinking outside of the Facebook group. In fact, I will say Facebook groups are particularly toxic because Facebook sells social graph data to Amazon that uses it to delete reviews. So the more socially proximate you are to your readers, the more likely those readers' reviews are to get deleted off of Amazon, because it looks like inorganic paid for reviews. Because a lot of people will, a lot of Amazon sellers will use Facebook groups to generate reviews for their products on Amazon. And so one of Amazon's ways of mitigating those fraudulent reviews is to buy social graph data from Facebook. So Facebook particularly is really bad, especially Facebook groups. So I'd like to share with you a better way, a way of bricks. Now, there are hundreds of bricks, and you could say that this whole conference is filled with bricks. But I want to give you a couple of key bricks before we go. So the first brick is to focus on the benefits. So, Brian, here in America, we have a kind of popcorn that comes in a box, and they're called Cracker Jacks. And inside of a Cracker Jacks box is a prize. It's like a toy or a goodie. And it's part of the fun of a Cracker Jacks box, because you never know what's going to be inside. They never tell you.
Mhm.
And so think of this as your book, right? What's the prize inside of your book? Obviously, it's the yummy popcorn, but it helps if there's something else as well. A lot of our authors are like Calvin, selling a swift kick in the butt, $1. And Hobbes comes up and he says, "How's business?" And Calvin says, "Terrible." "That's hard to believe." And then Calvin says, "I can't understand it. Everybody I know needs what I'm selling." And so this is more of a problem, I'll say, for nonfiction, but it's a problem for fiction as well, where you write the book you think people need rather than the book that they want. They need to want your book. You can present your book as a vitamin, or you can present your book as a painkiller. And for the sake of your book sales, I hope it's a painkiller. So what pain does your book reduce, right? Are people reading it because they're bored? Is this a thriller that they want to be fast paced? Or are they reading it because they're depressed and they're wanting to escape to a different world? They're wanting to read about a protagonist who is able to conquer dragons because they're struggling with the dragons in their own life. The more you can get down to that psychological reason that people are reading your specific genre, the more successful all of your marketing will be. The more successful your cover will be, your back cover copy, all the way down to your ads and even your title. And I have an episode all about this. It's called How to Write Better Than ChatGPT. And it's about those psychological motivations that cause people to want to read different kinds of fiction. All right. So now let's talk about brick number 2. And this is to get to know your readers. So join or start a reading club. This is such an easy hack. If you're not a part of a book group, join one. If you can't find one, start one. Start it on the genre that you're writing in and just listen. Sure, you can chime in too, but hearing what readers of your genre like and don't like about the books that they read is the most unbelievable cheat code. Almost no other authors do this. It's easy. You're probably reading these books anyway, or you should be, and it's unbelievably helpful market research. So read what your readers read. And the practice that I recommend is to find your Timothy. So what I used to recommend in my early days was to create a customer avatar or a customer persona. And this is a practice we did in the corporate world. We did it in radio. We'd have a listener persona that we would talk to. And it works in the corporate world, but it doesn't work for authors. I've taken hundreds of authors through this exercise, and it doesn't work because authors, especially novelists, are just too dadgum creative. They invent an imaginary friend who likes everything they write. And it doesn't end up being useful for making marketing decisions. And often the author just describes themselves in generic terms. So if it's a 45-year-old woman, she'll say she writes for women between the ages of 30 and 50 or whatever. And that's not helpful. So instead, I recommend that you do what most successful, really successful authors have done throughout history, and that is to write your book for a specific person. The Hobbit was written to thrill Christopher Tolkien, right? J.R.R. Tolkien's son, Christopher Tolkien. That's who Tolkien was trying to thrill. The Book of Timothy, which is where this term comes from, it's a book in the Bible. Millions of people have read it, but the book was written to just one person. And it's a misnomer to think, oh, well, if I write this book for one person, everyone else won't want it. No, that's not true, right? You're not a 12-year-old boy, and yet you probably read Harry Potter. But you wouldn't have read Harry Potter unless K. Rowling was able to first thrill the 12-year-old boys. So fit the shoe to the foot rather than trying to fit, and you fit the book to the reader. Right. So instead of trying to figure out, oh, I wrote this book, what kind of people want to read this book? You want to find the group of people you want to write to, and then write the kind of book that they want to read. If you don't start with your reader, start again, right? I thought you said dancing shoes. These are dancing shoes, right? What kind of dancing? So important if you want to be successful. All right. The third brick, and brace yourselves because I'm going to go through a lot of material here real quick. I'm going to give you an overview of my 5 baby steps to build a platform. And no, it's not just an excuse for me to show cute photos of my baby. So the purpose of these next 5 minutes is I'm not going to tell you how to do any of these things, but it's more of to give you a sense of what needs to be done in what order so you know what you don't need to worry about. So the first steps are picking your name. All right. Ideally, you want yourname.com or yourname. Whatever your country is, the primary domain. So if you're in the UK, you want to be able to get yourname.co.uk. So that's the next step. Once you pick your author name and you buy yourname.com, and sometimes authors will adjust their name or adjust their pen name in order to get the .com. Reserve your names on social media. Even if you're not going to use them, you want to at least own them so no one else can use them. So these are the basic things, right? These are things you can do even before you've decided on your genre or decided on your target audience. The next step is learning to crawl. This is where you build your website. Now, your website's not going to be great, right? Maybe it's just going to be one page. It's with some about information about who you are and what you're writing, and a sign up for your email newsletter. That's fine. You can start really simple. Start that timer really early. Google looks at how old a website is when it comes to Google rankings. So you want to start that timer as soon as you can. This is where you work on developing your craft, right? You're reading those books on craft. You're writing short stories. You're practicing. This is where you start your email newsletter. You start collecting email addresses. Your email list is your most valuable asset moving forward. The next step is learning to stand. We're not walking yet, but we are starting to use some of those walking muscles. This is where you're guesting on other people's platforms. You're being a guest on other people's podcasts. You're guest blogging on other people's blogs. You're writing short stories for other people's anthologies. This is also where you create a reader magnet. If you're a novelist, I recommend a short story, and hopefully you're writing lots of short stories as you're reading books on craft so that your reader magnet isn't the first short story you've ever written, right? This needs to be quality. This is your introduction to readers, the first thing they're going to experience and the key asset for building your email list. You'll create a landing page to promote that short story, and now you have something to send people to so they can get a taste of your writing right now before your book comes out. So now it's time for step number 4, learning to walk, right? So step 3, we were just standing. Now we're walking. This is where you're hosting your own podcast. You're launching your own book. You're advertising your book on Amazon or BookBub or Facebook. And then later on, you're getting into things like price pulsing, where you're reducing the price for a short time and doing a BookBub promotion. All of these things I have free episodes on, by the way. So if you go to novelmarketing.com, if you're wanting to learn how to do any of these things, I have episodes you can listen to. Also, a podcast app. Just do a search for novel marketing. And then finally is run. All right. So this is where you're doing this. These are the things that work after you're already famous. And this is really important to understand. The things I'm about to talk about, you have to be famous for them to work. And if you're not famous, you don't have to worry about them. Because they're not going to work. So just don't worry about it, right? So TV works great if you're famous, doesn't work if you're not. TV shows want to have you on only if you bring audience to that show. Book signings, great if you're famous, miserable if you're not, because nobody's there to meet you. Social media, again, great if you're famous, but not if you're not. So don't worry about these things if you're not yet famous. All right. So where do you get more bricks? Well, like I said, I have podcast novel marketing. We just, I think right around the time you'll be getting this session will be our 10th anniversary. We have 10 years of episodes, over 500 episodes across all of my different podcasts. And really, my entire career has prepared me to help authors. I used to be a literary agent. I used to be a marketing director for a publishing company. And I share with you what I know on my podcast for free. If you're wanting more help, I also have a paid course that goes into great detail on all of these things. And you can find that at obscurenomore.com. But really, I encourage you to start with the free podcast. It's absolutely free, novelmarketing.com. And with that, I think Brian may have some questions for me.
Absolutely great. I still marvel at your slides each and every time, and I know you get told this by a lot of people. So they're absolutely fantastic. So I think it's also down to, I mean, I get a lot of requests, as an advertising agency, I get a lot of requests from authors to do their ads for them. And I have to reject a lot of people, unfortunately, because it's simply not going to be effective to run ads to something that's not established, as something that's not even selling on its own. Because a lot of people say, well, then it's chicken and egg problem. Yes, but when I start ads for somebody who's already selling books and who has a platform, they perform better. So why is that? And
so there are, go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead.
So if you study marketing at university, in your marketing 101 class, they're going to teach you about the 4 P's of marketing. At least in English, they're 4 P's. I don't know if it translates, but those 4 P's are product, price, place, and promotion. So, Brian, what you're doing is promotion, right? You're getting the word out. And promotion only works if the first 3 are in work, right? So if the book is $200, you're not going to be able to sell it, even if your ads are perfect, right? Because if all the other books in that genre are $10, but your book is $200, you're not going to be able to sell it. Now, you can sell books for $200. Brandon Sanderson has made millions of dollars selling his books for $200. And there's a way to do it. And I even have an episode on it. But for most people, your price has to be pretty close to everybody else's price. And the same thing with place, right? If I want to buy your book on Amazon and it's not on Amazon, I can't buy your book. If you're forcing me to go to a local bookshop, or I hate Amazon and I only want to buy your book at my local bookshop and you're not there, right? If the place isn't working, then I can't buy your book. And that takes us to that first one, which is product. Your book has to not just be the kind of book that people want to read, but it has to look like the kind of book that people want to read. And this is what advertisers like Brian see real fast, is that, oh, this cover isn't going to work for ads, right? It doesn't matter if it's pretty, doesn't matter if you like it. What matters is this the kind of cover that people will click on? And this is just important, will they click on this book expecting to buy this kind of book, right? They click on it thinking that it's a cozy romance, and they read it and they realize it's a steamy romance and they don't want it. And now you've wasted your money paying for that click. Or they buy it thinking it's a cozy romance. They get to a steamy scene and now they're leaving you a 1-star review because they're angry, or vice versa, right? Like there's a lot of ways to rub people the wrong way. And so your product, the book, both the packaging and the substance need to be what appeal to readers. And you can't fix a bad product with good promotion.
Yeah, definitely. Some people get offended, and I'm obviously never reading these books because I wouldn't have time even if I wanted to. But I always say my perspective is based on marketing alone, and even then, I mean, even if it were the best book in the world, but it's packaged in the wrong way, it's impossible to sell, obviously.
Well, and that's the same way that readers are, right? Yeah. Because the reader has to decide whether or not to buy the book before they read it. This would be a very different business if readers chose how much to pay for the book after they read it, right? Like, so my podcast is free. And I'm supported by patrons. They only pay if they want to, and only after they listen to the episodes. And so it's a completely different relationship than it is for authors who have to convince you to pay for it before even getting to taste it. And so the marketing pressure for an author, especially a debut author, is really high. It gets easier, right? If it's your 10th book, you have people who read your first 9 books, and now they have some expectations of what that 10th book is going to be like. And you have some free sales, right? Some people who will say, shut up and take my money. It doesn't matter how good your cover is, because they're 9 books into your series and they want to know what happened to the prince and if he's going to end up with the princess. And they think that you'll tell them in book 10. And so they're going to buy it and they're going to read it.
One
But
very quick
you have to
last.
earn that.
Sorry. Yeah, of course. So one very quick last question is, I also hear from a lot of authors that say, I made this mistake, blah blah blah, and I still haven't recovered, or I made this mistake. Do you ever see? Do you think it's, in time it's possible to recover from these mistakes that you make, especially early on, or is there something that is really a no that you should stay away from? That really jeopardizes your platform and is hard to put straight.
So I'm going to answer this question 2 different ways, because it really depends on which world you're in. So when I was a literary agent, I saw firsthand how poisonous bad numbers are to an author's prospect. It doesn't matter how good the proposal is. If your numbers on your last book, especially your last several books, if those numbers are low, publishers don't want to touch your current work in progress. And so you can, with poor sales, effectively poison your career as an author in the traditional world, where the traditional publishers won't work with you, because they want a known commodity and they want known winners, because there's 1,000 authors who want your spot, and so they only want you if you're a winner. And once you have numbers that show that you're not a winner, they're not going to work with you. That said, as an indie, you can always write a new book and introduce yourself to a new group of readers. So there's always a chance to be reborn as an indie. And it's very common, very, very common for indies to kind of put their heads down. They write that first book, they put it out there, and it's awful. And they don't realize it's awful. And none of their friends have the heart to tell them that it's awful. And finally, as they're learning more and writing more, they have the eyes to see that first book is awful, and they'll take it down. They can never get the paper copies back, but they'll take that first book down. And sometimes they keep it down, and sometimes they rework it, right? Because now that they've written all these additional books, they have new eyes, they have new skills, and they're able to fix it and they're able to republish it. Another common thing with indies is they will publish a book and it has the wrong cover. Now, if you're traditionally published, the only chance you have to get a new cover is if you've sold through the first printing. Because if there's 10,000 copies in a warehouse, they want to sell those 10,000 copies before they print more copies. But if you're independent, your books are printed on demand, which means at any time you can change your cover, and your ebook can change as well, right, on the spur of a moment. So you'll see indies experimenting with covers, and they're like, oh, I thought my ads would work and they're not working, and so I'm going to try a different cover, and oh, this new cover is working better. Or I want to work with Brian and he says I have to get a new cover in order for him to do ads for me, so I'm getting a new cover. And you have a lot more ability to iterate and experiment as an indie than you do as a traditionally published author. Now, as a traditionally published author, you have more professionals around you to help ensure that it's done right the first time. Unless you're with a small house. Being with a small house is really the worst, because most small houses are really just some indie author who's publishing you, and you don't have the team of experts around you, and you don't have the marketing data to make your own decisions, and you don't have the margins, and you don't have the control. It's the worst of both worlds. So with few exceptions, I don't recommend publishing with a small house. I don't see very many authors in small houses succeed, but I do see I've worked with New York Times bestselling authors and traditional published authors who are making fantastic sums of money, and I've worked with indie authors who are making fantastic sums of money. So there's great money on the edges, right? Being full traditional or full indie, but being with a small house, I've never worked with a single author at a small house who's making fantastic money. Most of them are making very little at all. Which takes us to our final story, which is about 3 little authors who went off to find their publishing fortune. Now, the first author comes across an independent publishing company who says, if you publish with us, we will publish you on demand and you can have a book in your hands this very same day. And that sounded pretty good to the indie author. And so that's what he did. He published with a print on demand company. And sure enough, that very day he had his book in his hand. Then along came the big, bad Barnes and Noble. And he said, Barnes and Noble, let me in, let me in. And the Barnes and Noble said, who are you? We don't work with indie authors. And the Barnes and Noble blew the author off. Well, the second little author wasn't going to make that mistake, and he met with a literary agent who said, going with a publisher is more work, but it is more better. If you go with me, I can get you with Acme Publishing. So the author signed with the publisher, and he got published by Acme Publishing. And then along came the big, bad Barnes & Noble. And he said, Barnes & Noble, let me in, let me in. And Barnes & Noble said, yes, we see that you're with Acme Publishing. We will stock your book for 30 days. If it sells, we'll order more copies. But if it does not sell, we will return the copies to Acme Publishing. And so the little author waited for 30 days, hoping people would discover his book. But it was spine out. And nobody knew about him. Nobody had heard of the book. No one was walking into the Barnes & Noble to buy his book. And the books were returned. And Barnes & Noble would not talk to him. And Acme Publishing set his books on fire. And then wouldn't return his calls. But the third little author built a tall brick platform so that whether he traditionally or independently published, his book was sure to sell because he had an audience of readers eager to buy his next book. And no Barnes & Noble would ever want to blow him off because they knew his books would sell. Minimum effort leads to minimum results. Maximum effort with the wrong methods also leads to minimum results. But hard work brings success one brick at a time. Thanks for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Thomas. Don't forget to check all the links to Thomas's show and all of his resources. And I'll see you in the next session.